And we are recording. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Pomeranz, who shared with me as I introduced him last time that it's not 40 years, but 50 years of experience doing this. And one of the things he said last time that struck me and remained with me is he's been doing it so long because it's not what he does, it's who he is. And that hopefully becomes part of the job that all of us are doing, that we love. It's a vocation, it's not just a job. And something that we hope our clients can find in their lives as value and promoting that self-confidence that comes with employment. With that, I'm going to turn my camera off and mute myself and let Tom begin, pick up where he left off last time.
Perfect. Thank you, Herman, very much. And actually, Herman, it's 52 years, not 50 years. And those of you who were with me in part one, welcome back. And those of you who are joining us for the first time, delighted to have you here. Speakers are never supposed to start out with an apology, but I do. It's my voice, so I may be sipping water. Last time when, for part one, I came to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, from my home office, and today I'm in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I've been in Iowa and will be in Iowa the remainder of the week, working for AmeriGroup, which is Anthem Managed Care, training managers and supervisors throughout the state on how they can be more effective in increasing the skill set of direct support professionals. So I am in a hotel, and as I shared with Herman, this is the first day, I did one this morning, excuse me, I've conducted a virtual session from a hotel. So if somebody knocks on the door, excuse me, we'll sort of ignore them if it's housekeeping or something. Excuse me again. Anyways, a number of you provided some super questions. I mean, really honestly, and they were great. And it is my intent to answer and address all the questions that you asked as a result of part one. And what you will be seeing are a series of slides that I have integrated in this presentation to address those questions. Now, if for some reason you feel like they're not sufficiently addressed, please come back, excuse me, and and ask again, text in the question, and I'll respond further. But I think pretty much I have those questions answered. And again, I apologize for my voice. Well, where we left off, we were talking about the two key components with respect of an integrated employment opportunity for folks. And these two components, first of all, are everybody having a meaningful day. And you may recall how I defined meaningful. If the person we had doing it wasn't doing it, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. And so often the men and women who we support in traditional day programs are not engaged in a meaningful day, doing everything, as many of you know, putting pegs in boards, rings on sticks, beads on strings, etc. And obviously we wouldn't hire somebody to do that kind of activity. Ideally, and I will hit this point again, we would want everyone of working age to be employed in an integrated setting. When we are unable to achieve that, our fallback position is volunteering, because that still meets, right, our definition of meaningful, whether it's working at a food pantry or perhaps adopting a park and cleaning up the park, or what did they call it? I think in California, Heal the Bay, right? Where people walk along the shores and volunteer to pick up trash, on the beaches and so forth. So all of those things by definition are meaningful, because if the people we had doing them weren't doing it, they would have to hire somebody to do it. The second component is that all participants must experience an inclusive community presence. And sometimes people interchange the word integration and inclusion, but they are two very different things. I believe I indicated that last time. Integration means having a physical presence. Inclusion are the relationships that are formed as a result of being integrated. The best example that I can give is asking somebody to a dance is integration. Asking them to dance is inclusion. I really like that. I think that's a really good example. Let's talk for a moment about what happens when people are isolated. And by the way, I don't know if Herman mentioned it, but he's going to cue me at 50 minutes. I think he did. We're going to take a break at that time. But let's take a look at what happens when programs are facility-based programs and people are segregated. Now, you notice I use the word segregated, and I know we don't commonly use that word to describe facility-based programs, but by definition, they are segregated programs where we take a group of people with disabilities and aggregate them right all in one location, and may perhaps give them some opportunity during their day. And this is really interesting, the term used, to explore the community. Some agencies even call it community exploration. You sort of get this vision, don't you, of some guy in a pith hat and binoculars exploring their community. Well, that's not what we're about. So let's take a look at this. What is the problem? What occurs when we have facility-based programs? Individual competence is obscured by aggregating individuals by their disability. I mean, by definition, a group of people has a wide variety of abilities and skills, as well as a wide variety of limitations and levels of support that are required. And when we put a group of people together, it's obscured. We can't have an appreciation for what a particular individual can contribute. Secondly, grouping amplifies the disability. Matter of fact, many agencies even put a label on their facility-based program, like they'll call it a behavioral program. I've even seen signs that they will put on these day programs, and they'll call them behavioral habilitation programs or behavioral day programs. Can you imagine if you were a participant in one of those programs and you had to go into a place that everyone knew that you had interfering conduct, which is the word, by the way, that I really like, interfering conduct, because it interferes with quality of life. So grouping amplifies the disability common to each individual in the group. And sometimes you'll see day programs sometimes are very homogeneous, so sometimes you'll see these day programs where almost everyone there is medically fragile, or everyone there, or the vast majority of people use wheelchairs for their mobility. And all that does is amplify the disability, right? And assembling individuals with disabilities by those holding power over them. And I know those are strong words, but it's true, right? Support staff, managers, families, volunteers, will come back and say, well, the reason they are in this program, it is their choice. And I really believe that's hypocrisy, because how can it be a choice when you have an option of one? And for many folks, they haven't experienced life to be able to make a choice. Part of our responsibility is to help those we support to develop preferences. In self-determination, by the way, just as an aside, there are 3 components. Number 1 is options. Those are the things we put before somebody. Number 2 are preferences. Those are our wishes, our desires, what we prefer, right? And then finally, making a choice. And many people interchange the word option and choice, but they're 2 very different points. And you go to here's a mnemonic that may help. You go to a used car lot, right? And they show you a car with options: power steering, power brakes, air conditioning. It has options. They don't show you a car with choices. A choice is the act of selecting an option. And your selection or choice is based upon your preferences. So that when we say an individual has made that choice to be in that day program, that sort of suggests that they have had experience of many other things to have a preference, so they could make a choice. That's usually not the case, right? And next, is being grouped with individuals of the same disability a choice? It was just said when no viable option is presented to mingle and interact with a diversity of people, which is what we're seeking. And by the way, I am really, and I don't want to minimize how much I enjoyed the first session, but part 2 to me is far more exciting. I really enjoy talking about this content. So what are the consequences? When an individual's disability is the determining influence for grouping. Now, you'll note that in California, there is a very strong desire to do that. The state even has what is called like a level system. You'll hear staff talk about level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. You know, most of the country does not do that. I don't know where that comes from in California, because most of what you do is so outstanding, but there's a desire to make people as homogeneous as possible. When in fact, we all believe that diversity in life is great. We want there to be differences among the people who we support, as long as the difference doesn't make a difference. In other words, we don't want the needs of one individual to drain the resources from everyone else. We don't want the needs of one person to put other people in jeopardy, right? But you want diversity of individuals. You want some people who can speak and some people who can't, some who can walk and some who can't, some who have great social skills and some who may not. And unfortunately, that is an uphill battle for many providers because of this concept of levels that people are in. And it limits opportunities to develop the myriad of relationships realized through integrated educational, employment, leisure, and volunteer activities. So we're always striving for heterogeneity. And again, we remember those 2 points. As long as that difference doesn't make a difference, as long as the needs of one person doesn't pull needed resources from others in the group, right? So those were the 2 points. And to end this 2-pronged process, these outcomes must be realized. And this is the key point, right? Regardless of an individual's intellectual, physical, medical, psychological, or psychiatric challenges. The expectation is everybody has a right and should be given the opportunity to a meaningful day of employment. And if we can't figure out how to do that, then volunteering, a life of meaning, in an integrated setting where we promote opportunities for forming valued relationships with other people. Okay, and I'm going to drill down on this. Okay, somebody asked the question from part 1 about how does all this relate to individuals who are not of employment age? That is a great question. And if we look at our own lives, and by the way, most of the decisions that we make, in my opinion, on how to support people with developmental disabilities, those strategies, those approaches, those insights should come from our own lives. That's why the bottom of every single slide that I use in my training, I think there's like 5,250, somewhere around that, has the same 2 words, universal enhancement, because there are no special techniques or methods for the people who we support. So if we are introspective and we ask ourselves about our lives and what opportunities we had as adolescents, as children, young adults, in order to prepare us for employment. For most of us, there were many opportunities. I think about myself as my parents encouraged me when I was even in grade school to go around the neighborhood and mow people's yards for money. I was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, and northern Indiana, a lot of snow, something some of you may not be familiar with. And boy, every winter, from the time I was probably 9 years old, I would trudge up and down the street, you know, earning money, shoveling snow. And it gave me endurance, you know. I knew I had to work hard. I had to put my back into it. Some of you may have had an opportunity to babysit when you were younger for neighbors or friends to earn money. So these are the opportunities that, in my opinion, the vast majority of the men and women who we support who have significant developmental challenges, these are the type of opportunities that they are denied growing up as children, when in fact, they need more of those opportunities, not less. But to have those opportunities, it's going to require somebody to support them in the process. In our neighborhood, several years ago, we've been living there for 18 years, so this goes back a number of years. There is a family, we have like 42 homes, there's a family who have a daughter, and at the time I think she was about 10. She has cerebral palsy and a mild intellectual disability, but her cerebral palsy was significant. She uses a wheelchair for her mobility. And at that point, it wasn't a power chair. She was too young. She lacks the ability to turn the wheels of her chair and really needs a lot of hands-on physical assistance. And I'll never forget, I'm driving to my house and coming down the street, and here she was on a July day with a lemonade stand, there with her wheelchair, her mom near her. And even though her mom had to do a lot of physical assistance in helping her pour the lemonade for people who came by, she had that opportunity. Now just think about the importance of that and how that begins to put her on the path toward employment. So we need to do everything we can. And boy, it's a tough sell. You guys know that, especially service coordinators, to try to get parents to promote opportunities for their children, especially those that have significant challenges, okay? To have the same kind of opportunities typically developing children have. Without that, it's a huge hurdle for people to become employed. It's difficult enough for those of us who have had those opportunities. You know, I'm under contract with the Fort Worth Public School System, helping them revamp their curricula for a certain group of students in certain schools for their transition program. Really interesting. This is 18 to 22 transition. And one of the things that's so challenging in putting this curricula together and preparing these folks for being an adult and being employed is the fact that the vast majority of them never had the normative experiences most individuals do who are 18, 19, and 20 and so forth. And our folks need more of those experiences, not less. John Kennedy had a great quote. And as many of you know, I love maxims. And if you're interested, please go to my website, go to the toolbar and click on maxims. Maxims are pithy little phrases that concretize complex concepts. And I thought this was so appropriate to share with you at this time. To whom much is given, much is expected. And much is given to the people who we support. I mean, think about it. I mean, most of the people we support receive far more than other individuals in terms of what the government provides in entitlement programs and all the people and commonly that are in their life that need to be employed in order to assist them in their routines and so forth. Now, certainly when Kennedy said this, I don't think he ever had in mind how this would apply to people with disabilities. But in my opinion, it does. It does. To whom much is given, much should be expected. And I have an expectation for people with developmental disabilities. My expectation is that we need to promote within them giving and doing for others. The purpose of life is a life of purpose, right? In all cases. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Being an adult is a bilateral process. One has to know how to give as well as receive. Children are on the receiving end of giving. That doesn't bother any of us because that's what childhood is about. But when we're an adult, the expectation is you probably should be giving more than you are receiving. And if we really want the men and women who are in our service system to be valued and respected by the larger society, we need to promote their opportunity to give and do for others, regardless of the challenges that they may have, as I outlined, with their physical, psychological, or whatever. Work is the great equalizer. I may have said this earlier. I don't think I had this slide there, but it is the great equalizer, right? My grandparents came to this country, one from Romania, one from Lithuania, one from Poland, and one from Russia, couldn't speak a word of English. I may have shared that earlier. Didn't have 10 cents in their pocket, right? And they found their place in this society through work, hard work. Women, in my opinion, in this society, in this culture, have forever been treated in many quarters as second-class citizens. Women are beginning to find their place and value in this society through work. Racial minorities who have been horribly discriminated against are beginning to find their place in this society through work. If you agree with what I am saying, if you accept that, then why would it be any different for the men and women who we support? And you talk about people that are marginalized. I can't think of any other group that is marginalized more than the people under our umbrella, people with developmental disabilities. We may not recognize it, but they are truly marginalized. So there is a value basis for work. As I said, it is the great equalizer. It promotes equality and it enhances self-worth. I don't have to convince you of that. You know it all by, you're all working. And it allows us all to say, I am somebody. I'm a good and valued human being. And I can't imagine a life where one doesn't see themselves as a good and valued person who is making a difference in their larger community. Work leads to self-determination, right? It leads to self-determination because employment provides money. And money empowers, and money allows people, right? Self-determination. Remember the 3 points? Options, preferences, choices. Well, if I have money, I can have more options. Limited revenue, limited dollars decrease the options I can have in my life, whether the options of where I wish to live, my options of where I would like, what food I eat, what kind of clothes I wear. So employment maximizes or improves self-determination. Work emphasizes ability. I love that one, right? What an individual can do. Whereas traditional day programs focus on deficiency. We, matter of fact, establish goals and objectives in order to habilitate the person. Wherein, when people are employed, the opportunity for employment, focusing on strengths, leads to the individual growing, developing, and become more independent. What do I mean by that? Is that when we are employed, when we're working or even volunteering, it promotes an opportunity to learn new skills, even though it's based upon our competencies. I commonly tell people, there's very little that I'm sharing with you now in any session that I learned in college. The vast majority of what I know, I've learned as a result of my work. And so it should be for those we support. Their work should allow them to grow, to improve their social skills, their language skills, their communication skills, their ability for endurance and attention to task, right? The kind of things that we've identified in many of those who we support, areas that they need improvement on. But rather than focusing on these areas as deficiencies, let's give people an opportunity to focus on their strength. And out of that, they will grow, develop, and become more independent, like you and I do through our work. Work is liberating. It frees the individual from a life of dependence. Because, again, if I have money, I'm not dependent on other people as much in my life. I mean, we're all interdependent, are we not? But it's truly liberating. And most importantly, I mean, I can't emphasize this point enough. Competence is not a prerequisite for work. And it's not. That's a hard sell. I will tell you, much of what I'm sharing with you today, there's very few people who agree with me. Now, if I were to ask you right now, do you agree with me? As I would, if you were actually, if this wasn't virtual and we were in a classroom together, I would ask you, and everyone would likely raise their hand that they agree with these things conceptually. But often our words are drowned out by our actions. You know, providers, when I'm training their providers, they say they agree. But then you look at what they do, and they end up with good time Charlie programs where people are, where they turn the program right over to the individual. What would you like to do today, right? And what he wants to do is color or something, right? So our words are commonly drowned out by our actions. Employment is far more than just earning money. And that's a really important point, right? That's why even with the fallback position of volunteering is, you know, if people volunteer, it would be my preference, they would volunteer in addition to employment, you know, like many of us volunteer. You may volunteer at your house of worship on the weekend, or you may volunteer at some kind of activity, sports activity for your children on Saturday, but it's separate and apart from work. And if those we support want to volunteer, that's fine, but it shouldn't take the place of employment. But unfortunately, many times we can't figure out, a huge percentage of times, I gave you some of those statistics, I believe, last time, that such a small percentage of the men and women who we support are employed, and it's a challenge to get many of them employed, that our fallback position may have to be volunteering. So employment is an opportunity for people with disabilities to join the rest of us. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? I like that. Employment is an activity that facilitates social connections and acceptance. Right. The vast majority of all my valued relationships, now maybe I'm unique, I'm saying this to you, as a result of my employment. The vast majority. You know, I have some valued relationships from college with some of the guys in my fraternity, but the vast majority of my social connections are a result of work. And employment is a stage where one can proclaim, and we said this before, I am somebody. I'm a good and valued human being. Employment is an activity that fulfills social expectations. Our general society expects people to be employed. We expect people to give and do for others. So there are three categories. I'm using the word work, and I want to clarify something, okay? The word work is a generic word. And remember how we defined it is that if the person you had doing it wasn't doing it, you'd have to hire somebody to do it. Well, there's really three categories of work. Employment, which is remunerated, volunteering, and I'm going to give us further definition, which is for a civic good. And there's a third category of work, and that's work that we do to benefit ourselves directly. I prepare my meals. I do my laundry. I clean my house. All three of these are important, essential parts of being an adult, if you will. And unfortunately, this is not a discussion on number three. Maybe someday you'll invite me back, because I feel very strongly about number three in the residential environments where our folks, many of the people we support, live, where they are denied an opportunity to be supported in home chores in their life. A lot of direct care staff rather than direct support professionals, right? Remember, work is the expenditure of meaningful effort. And our conversation here focuses on how we're going to help people get to number one. So an employment is an activity performed by an individual where there is an expectation of wages for services, the services that are rendered, and the services are primarily for the benefit of the employer, right? We do that so the employer benefits. If it's a for-profit, obviously it increases their profit. If it's a not-for-profit, their mission, vision, that organization benefits because the person who's employed at the not-for-profit furthers the mission of the organization. So who is the employer? Many people, oh, this is like really important. If you ask yourself, what motivates people to be employed? And what are the consequences for you and I if we're unemployed? This is sort of an interesting time to ask that question, since apparently there's a very large number of people. I was just reading an article today in the Wall Street Journal who are deciding not to go back to work right away for a huge variety of reasons. But let's take a look at this. We're motivated, when I say we are, many people are motivated to be employed in order to avoid poverty. And you'll see where I'm going with this, right? It's a motivating factor. I don't want to be poor. I want to be able to eat. I don't want to be dependent upon somebody else. We're motivated to be employed because of the stigma associated with not being employed. Now, obviously, these are not true for all people, but they're generally true. We want to be employed because we fear losing our self-determination, right? I don't have money, so I have very limited options. And when I have limited options, I can't really effectively self-determine. I want to avoid poverty and being poor, because if I am, I'm going to be dependent on other people, somebody. I mean, either my family or government, but it results in dependence. And many of us don't want to be dependent on other people. And being employed, we're motivated to be employed because it allows us to acquire discretionary luxury items. I mean, something, and I would put in that category going on a vacation as an example, right? Which is a discretionary item, going on vacation. And if we couldn't do those kind of things, those things that are discretionary, it would, I think, in the opinion for most of us, undermine the quality of our life. Here's the question. Now, this is really important. What role do these consequences play in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities to motivate their employment? Well, there's several issues here. Number one, all of these things are obtuse. They're abstract. It's not like me holding up this bottle and saying, this is a bottle of water and I'm going to drink it. I mean, these are complex concepts. And there's people of normal intelligence that have difficulty understanding this and them being motivating factors. So there's a very large percentage of the people who we support that can't be motivated by these things because they can't comprehend them. They don't understand what they'll gain or what they'll lose. Secondly, there's a large number of people who may understand these concepts, but they're not motivated because we have such a fabulous safety net for so many people, right? Especially in California, you got your wonderful Medi-Cal, and not to say private health insurance may be a lot better, but my goodness, you got Medi-Cal and people have SSI, and you have we have home and community-based wage supports, and the county has that in-home kind of housekeeping services they provide for some people. So even if I don't work, there's this safety net to protect me. And from our perspective, many of us may not feel that same way. That same safety net may not be there. So the point I'm trying to make, the motivating factors are not the same for many of the people we support as they are for us. And then volunteering, definition, and activity done on a personal basis to enable growth and skills development, improve social interactions, and that's important, right? And development of self by contributing to society through volunteerism or increased community interaction and participation in civic events. While there is value in this activity, it is not typically recognized through financial remuneration. Matter of fact, if we were financially remunerated, it probably wouldn't be considered volunteering, it would be considered employment. Though there are some people like on boards of directors that volunteer that they give small stipends to. I mean, obviously there's some exception. Now, this is pretty wonderful when you read this. I mean, look at this. It does volunteering and I pulled this definition together from a lot of different definitions in order to describe, I think, from our perspective, why volunteering can be important when we cannot figure out how to get somebody employed. And it can achieve many of the same outcomes as employment, such as opportunities for being integrated, opportunities for forming relationships, opportunities for improving social skills, opportunities to learn a wide variety of skills, and certainly results in others, valuing that individual who is making that contribution. This is very interesting. I pulled this article, right? And I know you can't read that. And so sometimes when I use articles, I go ahead and I, extrapolate something from the article. I just wanted to share this with you. And this is word for word out of the article. And part of my screen is blocked, so I can't see the very first line. Sorry about that. The lawmaker is calling for legislation that would require Georgians who are receiving unemployment benefits to perform community service. State Senator John Albers of Roswell wants those on unemployment to volunteer at least 24 hours a week at charities. The bill is called the Dignity for the Unemployed Act. Quote, if you don't work, then benefits would stop. Albers said, quote, we want to have a society that is responsible and that is accountable. Now, the point I want to make is that there's people, lots of people, who think that way, right? So if someone is going to gain benefit and be supported by our larger society, should they be paying something back in the form of volunteering while they're doing it? And I'm sure there's supposed to be 250 of you signed up for this, and we probably have 250 opinions as to the implications of this. But I'm sharing it with you because there is a feeling within our culture that if somebody is receiving support, entitlement, whether it's unemployment as an example, or Medicaid waiver services, that they should be giving back. Okay, now this comes out of a question, okay? And I don't know exactly how the question was posed by one of you, but it was a really great question. What is prompting and pushing the closure of facility-based day programs and that push toward people being integrated, right, into community settings? Well, if you're not aware, one of the things that is pushing that is the Olmstead Act. And I want to talk about it. You are aware that over the last, I don't know how far back, maybe 15 years is when it started, the state of California had started the process of closing its state-operated developmental centers. And, one can say, boy, isn't the state legislature of California absolutely wonderful? They so are concerned about the quality of life of the people living in these institutions, that in a belief that if they lived in community settings, their quality of life would improve significantly. Well, it's true. I think it will improve. In my opinion, it wasn't the desire to improve quality of life that pushed the closure of the state institutions in the state of California, whether it's Lanterman Developmental Center or whatever it may be. It was, as in most states, the Olmstead Act, which equally applies to facility-based services. Let's take a look at this. Olmstead, and again, I apologize because and I can't move this thing to read it fully, but in 1999, the Supreme Court construed Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, ADA, right? And if I ask you, well, what is ADA about? Many of you would say, well, cutting curbs, widening door frames, and expanding bathroom stalls. No, it's much more than that. The interpretation of ADA is the purpose of expanding the door frame is to allow the person to move into their community, to be part of their community, whether it's to access a courthouse and to be able to vote, or get into a grocery store and buy groceries, right? So the interpretation of ADA under Olmstead is not just physical changes in an environment, but using public monies and dollars to support individuals with disabilities to be part of their community. And in particular, not using public monies to segregate people. In other words, what good would it do to widen the door frame if we used public monies to keep people in a building, whether it's a sheltered employment program or a facility-based day program or a group home, and they weren't part of their community, or a state institution, a developmental center? So it It requires qualified individuals with men. This is not my wording. This is right from the Olmstead Act, with mental disabilities in community settings rather than in institutions. Now, let's keep going. The Department of Justice regulations implementing Title II of the ADA require public entities to administer their services, programs, and activities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of qualified individuals with disabilities. The most integrated. Well, by definition, a facility-based day program is not the most integrated. By definition, a sheltered employment program is not the most integrated. By definition, a state-operated developmental center is not the most integrated. And by definition, a group home is not the most integrated type of setting. And you may say, but wait a minute, we have a huge number of sites throughout California that are in violation of the Olmstead Act. Boy, don't we? But here's the point. There are no Olmstead police. It's sort of like if you walked with me right now into the street. I'm looking at a street out here. In front of the street, there is a sign and it says 35 miles per hour, okay? That's the law, 35 miles an hour. I will guarantee you, if you and I stand there and watch the cars go by, we're going to see somebody doing 40, 45, or 50. Now, the fact that they're going 50 miles an hour in a 35 doesn't invalidate the speed limit. It just means whoever is supposed to enforce it wasn't there to enforce it. So things like the Olmstead, really the way they get enforced is by people filing complaints with the Department of Justice, and not many complaints are filed. And then if they are, they take forever to follow up an investigation about, why that program exists. But states are making real progress. Now, we have another motivating factor to eliminate these facility-based programs, and that's the new settings rule, which somebody asked about too, because that's a real impact on promoting opportunities for adults to have an integrated day, which we will. And I'm actually going to share with you some of the content from the new settings rule, which I love. The new settings rule is one of the reasons I have no plans for retirement, honestly. There is nothing that has ever happened in my 52 years in the field that even comes close to the impact of the new settings rule. I want us to look at it because it so directly relates to our conversation today. So not only does Olmstead impact these segregated settings, this is interesting, right? Sheltered workshops, developmental centers, facility-based day programs, group homes, and other places. It also has implications for people who are at risk of institutionalization. That term institutionalization doesn't mean like just a DC, a developmental center. In the context of the Olmstead Act, it means segregated environments, in essence, including people with disabilities on waiting lists to receive community-based services and supports. Because if you're on a waiting list, you're being prevented from, because the thought of a waiting list is it's an opportunity to move toward a less restrictive option or alternative. So somebody who is 45 years old and living with their parents and uses a wheelchair, and the person spends all day at home because their parents don't have the resources, or perhaps their parents are elderly, to allow them to have a community life and be integrated and be employed. They're living an institutional life, right? I mean, they are segregated from the rest of society, even though they are living with their families. You got to remember the definition of an institution. An institution is not a place, it is a state of mind. Right? You can't blow it up and you can't close it down. Unfortunately, when many of the people leave large state-operated developmental center like Agnews, California is an example, the people who work there are lying to us. You know what they tell us? They're moving to the community, right? Right. You can't move to the community. The community is not a place. You can't find it. You can't locate it. You got to build it. You got to create it. And that's what this discussion is about. It's about supporting people in being part of their community and help them develop that community, those relationships, through employment and volunteering. The United States Department of Justice recently stated its belief. Now, this is it. that the Olmstead Act applies to employment and placement in a sheltered workshop and similar facilities may be a violation of the Olmstead Act. So why do we see so many sheltered employment programs closed throughout the country? Yeah, part of it is that whole deal on the wage certificate. We had discussed that in part one, where sheltered employment programs are unable, the vast majority, to be financially self-sustaining unless they put people on a wage certificate and pay them less than minimum wage. That's part of it. But the other part, excuse me, is the Olmstead Act, because it's a segregated environment. So sorry about my voice. Okay, here we go, friends. Now, self-advocates, right, for becoming empowered, SABE, I don't know if you're familiar with the organization, they've specifically called for the closure of sheltered workshops. Sheltered workshops have to be part of our discussion because the focus, as Herman has indicated, our discussion is integrated employment, right? And the participants or members of self-advocates becoming empowered, they state clearly and unequivocally, quote, we have been prepared enough. Well, what's the point? Get us real jobs, close sheltered workshops, because sheltered workshops historically were seen as a stepping stone toward more integrated opportunities for employment. But the truth is, as we had discussed in part one, for the vast majority of people in sheltered employment programs, it is not a stepping stone. It is an end game. That's where many of them end up. Translation. People with disabilities must receive services and supports in the least restrictive community setting. Now, I have a concern. When we look at Olmstead and we look at the new settings rule, we can make a really strong case legally to eliminate segregated facility-based programs for people. I don't like to do that. In other words, I don't believe they should be eliminated because a law was passed. I believe we have to communicate to families, to the people who work at these places, that the reason these programs need to be transitioned is not because of the law, but because it's the right thing to do. I would hope we would be doing this if there was no Olmstead Act. I hope we'd be doing this if there was no new settings rule under home and community-based waivered services, right? Well, guess what? You all know what that maxim is. The dog is finally caught up with the car. Because what we're talking about, many of us have wanted for decades. We've wanted people to be an integral part of their community. We want them to give and do for others. We wanted them to have valued relationships. And now when we're faced with that reality, because of the consequences legally with Olmstead and financial consequences of not doing it, and perhaps decisions being made by the Centers on Medicaid and Medicare of not funding programs that do not meet the new settings rule, we're there. We have to do it. Are you suggesting that we're close to time? Is that why you plugged in there, Herman? Or I can't hear you. You're mute.
Yeah.
Oh, it is 3:50. Okay. So why don't we go ahead, if we could, folks? Let's take and it's not 3:50. It's whatever time it is. It's your place, but we'll take 10. We'll take 10 minutes and be back at we start at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock your time. Okay, and I'm going to start absolutely on time. We've got so much to cover, folks. I'm going to really move. I'm excited about really getting into this because there's a lot to share. Oh, my goodness gracious. Okay, it's on the hour, and I'm going to go ahead and continue. And feel free, if you have any questions, by the way, to text them to Herman, and I'm sure he'll share those with me. One of the questions that was asked as a result of part one, and I did not have any specific slides to integrate on this, but I want to make sure I answer the question, is what were my thoughts about families, parents in particular, employing their son or daughter with a developmental disability in a family-owned business? Well, from my perspective, that's it's common for families to employ sons and daughters in family-owned businesses, the vast majority of whom do not have a disability. So it is not anything that is particularly unusual, and that's one of the reasons why, that's one of the things family-owned businesses do, is employ other members of the family. What's important from my perspective is that they would need to meet the same rules, regulations as if employing any other family member, so that unemployment comp, workers' compensation, FICA, all of those things they would do for any other family member, those same benefits would apply under the same set of conditions. Secondly, in order to minimize animosity, certainly accommodations can be made and should be made when people have disabilities in the workplace. But accommodation is one thing versus allowing, the son or daughter with a disability to not meet expectations when they're capable of doing it. In other words, expecting less than what they're actually able to do. So I think as long as the rules and regulations are followed, as I delineated, and as long as there is a reasonable expectation for them to put their back in it and work as hard as any other employee, their level of production may well fall short or may not fall short, then I think being employed in a family-owned business would make sense, unless there's something I'm missing else within that question. But I wanted to answer that since I don't have a thing on it. Okay, this is a big part of the discussion that originally I did not have in this presentation. I'm doing it because of the questions that were asked. And this has to do with Medicaid waiver and its implications for facility-based programs. And what I'm going to do in terms of segregated facility-based day programs. I'm one of the slides here near the end of this discussion on home and community-based waiver new settings rule has a very specific statement in it, and we all need to be aware of what that requirement is. And you may all be, so excuse me if that's the case. On July 30, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law legislation that established the Medicare and Medicaid programs, okay? Now, what was interesting about those programs is that they were institutional in nature. In other words, Medicaid would provide financial support and services for individuals who met a means test for Medicaid, obviously not Medicare. And there were institutional services so that you would receive Medicaid in a nursing home. That's an institutional environment. And then a few years later, what was it, 1969, and excuse me for use of the R word, but it was in law at the time, ICFMR legislation was passed, which you now know as ICFDD, Intermediate Care Facilities for People with Developmental Disabilities. But again, very institutional. Medicaid also covered healthcare costs for those who met the means test in hospital settings. And it was that way for a long period of time, right? And this is important. And so it made funding available in institutional settings. In terms of our population, people with developmental disabilities could get those services in long-term care environments like nursing homes, state-operated developmental centers, and acute healthcare settings. Then it was decided prior to 1991, and as it said, it only paid for services in these institutional settings. And then the Centers on Medicaid and Medicare put in place a settings rule, okay? So it was established that the setting did not have to be institutional, and the federal rules and regulations were waived. Lots of times people talk about Medicaid waiver, but if I ask them, well, what do you think the word waive, what is waived? Well, what is waived are the institutional requirements. So in essence, when the new settings rule came into place, after not the new settings rule, when the original settings rule came in place, it allowed people to receive services in a wide variety of places. Like it could be their own home, as you know, right? Two people cohabitating and receiving support with waived services. And the intent was for these things not to be institutional in nature. Well, guess what happened? And we all know is that states started to pile on rules and regulations. And people, 3 or 4 people were living in a home with waiver dollars. And the next thing you know, they had to have a fire drill. And the next thing you know, in some states, they had to have some unseen face from a far off line with the RD initials after their name, coming up with menus and telling them what they have to eat. And then we had to have staff who had to be tested for diseases. And we ended up almost right back where we were into an institutional model. Hopefully this is making sense to everyone because it's really important. So sometime prior, probably 3 or 4 years, probably March 17, 2014 is when the new NEW settings rule was implemented. It came out, and probably at least 3 years prior to that, CMS brought people together, stakeholders, to begin to develop the content for the new settings rule. And then it was issued in March, I think March 17, 2014. And states had 1 year to submit their plan on how they were going to implement this new settings rule. Because the Centers on Medicaid and Medicare says, we got to get rid of all these institutional rules and regulations, because that was the original intent of the waiver program. And so that's what makes this so exciting, right? And the new CMS expectations, and I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but I need to make the point about what is the relationship between the new settings rule and integrated employment, right? That's integrated services, whether it's integrated volunteering or what. The rule requires, and this is not my wording, this is a direct quote from waiver. The rule requires that, quote, community-like setting be defined by the nature and quality of the experience of the individual receiving services. Community-like. In all settings, the rule requires that the setting is selected by the individuals from options that include non-disability specific settings. Now that's true whether residential or not. So that means wherever I want to receive, in essence, my day supports, that's where I can get them. Same thing with residential. I want to live in a cabin in the woods. I want to live in a cottage on a lake. I want to live on a farm. So under the new settings rule, I mean, it really empowers the individual to receive their day supports where they would like. It really is going to redefine licensing. I'm not even sure what role licensing is going to have down the road here at all. But you can see as we move forward here what its implications are for facility-based programs. And I'm not going to go into any detail about residences because we're not talking about residential environment. But it says, and this here says that the individual must be able to access their physical environment and may interact with family and friends, right? Isn't that interesting? Access their physical environment. When there is no requirement in any state that any environment that people live in are accessible, there are no mandatory requirements in the state of California. If you get home and community-based waivered services, that your environment has to be accessible. The only requirement is it has to be barrier-free. So that means that if you use a wheelchair and there's steps on the front door, you got to put in a ramp so the person can get into the house, right? Or the day program is barrier-free. I have to be able to get into the bathroom. There can't be any barriers, but no requirement for accessibility. So you'll go into a home and people use wheelchairs, can't even use their kitchen sink because no one will remove the doors under the kitchen sink and do a cutout. Or you'll see that they'll have an oven in the home and all the controls are in the back and the person can't use the oven. They have washing machines that are top loading. And again, this is not in conflict with any rules or regulations in the state. Don't feel bad. No state has accessibility requirements for either facility-based day programs or residential environments. But look what this says now. They have to be able to access their physical environment. So maybe for the first time, we're going to be pushed to try to make environments accessible for the people who reside in those environments. And I'm going to skip this stuff on residential because I want to make a point here. And it's coming. Here we go. There it is, right there, all the way at the end. And this is not my wording. This is directly from the waiver requirements, new settings rule. Any other setting that has the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid HCBS from the broader community of individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS. Quote, close quote, right? Thus, you can see where that puts facility-based day programs that are supported by waiver dollars. Now, there are day programs that are supported by ICFDD dollars, not many in California, but there are some that does not apply to them. And obviously, we can maintain people in segregated environments if it's private pay, and there are places throughout the country that are and will continue to do that. But for the most part, the new settings rule will all but eliminate, in my opinion, the segregated environments to whatever that law will be enforced. Okay. And I will skip this. Now, this is really interesting. In order to meet this integrated opportunity, some states propose doing reverse integration. Now, what does that mean? CMS expressed concern that Kentucky, quote, has added language suggesting that bringing individuals from the community into service settings, particularly non-residential, such as facility-based day programs, right, would enable them to meet the integration requirements of the HCBS setting rule. Under the rule, quote, this is the response from the Centers on Medicaid and Medicare, right? Quote, with respect to non-residential settings, right, facility-based day supports, providing day activities, the setting should ensure that individuals have the opportunity to interact with the broader community of non-HCBS recipients and provide opportunities to participate in activities that are not solely designed for people with disabilities or HCBS beneficiaries that are aging, but rather for the broader community. So we have a strong case for an integrated day. What's interesting is HCBS new settings rule has no expectation that people are productive. And that's not, remember, policies and procedures basically are intended to keep bad things from happening, right? We have a rule about having fire drills in homes or earthquake drills and rules about, the medication administration record, how we assist people in getting medications. So policies, rules are basically intended to keep bad things from happening. Good people cause good things to happen. And you're good people, right? So if people are going to have a meaningful, productive day, that's not a function of the rules. That's going to come about because good people have made a decision to pursue that. Okay, now best practice day services achieve the following. Number one, people need to be productive, giving and doing for others, right? Work is production. Number two, ideally, we want people to get paid. I'm giving you the 5 elements that we want to achieve in day supports. People need to be productive. They should be remunerated, which means they would be employed. Why? Money is a pathway to emancipation. We said that. Emancipation is very similar in some ways to self-determination. Wealthy people know how to make it, save it, and keep it. Support people with disabilities on their path toward emancipation. So one of the questions, and I put this whole thing in here about ABLE, which is really important, because one of the questions asked was a concern some parents have, families, that their sons or daughters' Medi-Cal or SSI would be impacted if they were employed and earning money. And that should not be the case. And let me go through the details. It's ABLE, and I know many of you are knowledgeable about ABLE, but I'm obligated to answer the questions that were posed. Tax advantage savings accounts for individuals and their families are very similar to those accounts that the federal government IRS established like 20 years ago or so, where families could put away money for their children's education. that was tax deferred. And ABLE is an acronym for Achieving a Better Life Experience. The beneficiary of the account is the account holder. So the person who is earning the money with a developmental disability is the account owner. Income earned by the accounts will not be taxed if they are applied to qualifying disability expenses. That's really important, right? Contributions to the account may be made by any person, the account beneficiary, family, and friends, so they can add money to it beyond what the person may earn through employment. Contributions are made using post-tax dollars and are not tax deductible. For example, California contributions are limited to $15,000 per year is how much money can be put in there. The accounts are modeled after a 529 college savings plan, as I just had indicated before. ABLE accounts allow the individual, and this is the part that's important that answers the question. ABLE accounts allow the individual with a disability to spend their money on qualified disabled expenses. The law defines qualified disabled expenses as any expense needed for living with a disability. So it could be buying a vehicle with a lift. It could be making modifications within my home to make it more accessible. It may even be going to college because to help me get a job, which I otherwise might not be able to do because of my disability. So including education, housing, transportation, employment training and support, healthcare expenses, and more. ABLE accounts provide choice and control of disabled beneficiaries and their families, then special needs or pooled trust, and cost less to set up. There are other options that people have used in the past in terms of setting up trust. I'm sure you're aware of that for their sons and daughters, but this is far less expensive. You don't have to involve attorneys and drop all the documents and everything. To be eligible, the participants must be an individual with significant disabilities, including mental health conditions developed before the age of 26. And that's reasonable enough. Individuals who meet this criteria and receive SSI or SSDI are automatically eligible for ABLE accounts. That's great. They don't even really have to prove it. Those not receiving them must meet SSI criteria for significant functional limitations. Okay. If you meet SSI or SSDI, the means test does not apply. Savings held, now look at this, does this blow your mind? Savings held in an ABLE account up to $100,000, and that $100,000, you can save that and it will not impact your SSI. But look what I put in parentheses. In California, you can save up to $475,000 and still participate in Medi-Cal. $475,000. So the concept historically is to get Medi-Cal, there's a mean test, right? But I have a hard time considering anybody poor with a savings account of $475,000, right? Most of us should be so lucky. So anyways, California has been really generous. Now, that $475,000, if you had that, you'll lose your SSI. You can only have $100,000 in there and still keep your SSI. But Medi-Cal, you can go up to $475,000. In essence, the ABLE Act has increased the cap for accountable assets from $2,000 to $100,000 for disabled individuals seeking eligibility for SSI. CalABLE. Oh, yeah, I got a misspelling there. Sorry about that. CalABLE became available in California in 2018. I just had added that. Got a misspell, sorry. Okay, so that's production, remuneration, 5 aspects. Inclusion, which is really important. One of the reasons that one of the things that should come out of employment is the valued relationships that we achieve. Employment and volunteer interactions with people, with the same people in the same location, are more likely to lead to valued relationships. That's the interesting thing about employment. We tend to have repeated interactions with the same people. In volunteering, we tend to have repeated interactions with the same people. And there's a word that says it all. Are you ready? if this wasn't virtual and you were in a classroom, I'd give you this word and I would see who could figure it out. Cheers. You figure it out? It's the program. It's where everybody knows your name, right? And you have a group of, remember, heterogeneous people. In Cheers, you know, you have the guy who's an attorney, the person, the woman is sort of a floozy, the guy who has issues with alcohol. And you have this diversity of people, but they form these valued relationships. I'm not sure whether they're friends, because friendship is very different than a relationship. I have a lot of friends, LinkedIn, FaceTime, whatever, but Facebook, but probably only 3 friendships, many relationships. And hopefully when we support people in integrated settings, whether employed or volunteering, it will lead to valued relationships with other people, which is one of the 5 things we're looking for, which is called inclusion in our day supports. And next, and then this one's sort of heavy here, folks. You just need to know I'm tough, right? My expectations, I'm not real, how can I say this? The standards and expectations that I have for the people who we support are pretty high. I'm pretty tough. I've always been concerned that, you know, if you're not tough, it can come across as infantilization. You know, these men and women are not children in adult bodies, right? An adult, you know, is determined by age and not how smart you are. They're adults. So I think we have to hold them in that regard. So what's my point on enjoyment? If I had my druthers, I want everyone to enjoy their employment, their work. I want them to enjoy their volunteering. I say that because I know how much I love work. Ideally, that should be the case. But if they can't find employment that they like, that's it. Responsible adults take whatever employment is available. Bite the bullet. I'm sorry. I mean, that's what, and I know that upsets some people when I say that, but it's true for, right, the vast majority of all of us. I mean, I know if I couldn't do what I'm doing now to earn a living, you'd find me selling shoes at a shoe store. Do I want to sell shoes at a shoe store? No, I probably hate getting up in the morning, but I'm a responsible adult. You're a responsible adult. And, you know, like I'll go into a traditional day program and I'll meet some guy who's 24 or something. You know, I said, and he's able to hold a really good conversation. He seems very capable. And I said, you currently have a job, employed part-time? He said, no. I said, have you ever had a job? He says, well, no. I said, would you like to be employed? He says, yeah. I said, well, why do you think you're not employed? And he says, well, I haven't found anything I like yet. What? Come on. I mean, that's infantilization. And why does he believe that? Because the people around him have gotten him to believe that it's okay, I haven't found what I like yet, so I can just, you know, sit here in this day program and drink coffee, right? And I know that I know it turns some people off, but I take that position because of my belief in a concept called GEM. It's an acronym. It stands for good enough for me. And when I look at the people who we support, I do not see them. I see myself. And I'm saying to myself, that's me. And even though I may not be able to make an informed consent decision, and I don't understand the social and psychological consequences associated with not being employed and not working, I may not understand how other people see me and may not value me as much. I would want people in my life to urge me, to support me in making decisions that enhance the quality of my life and enhance how other people see me, even if I lack the ability to understand it. That's my position. I don't know how else to say it. And then number 5 is learning. I really want people to have a day and spend their time where they can grow, develop, and become more independent. I see that as so important. Growing, developing, and becoming more independent. the vast majority, as I said, of everything I know is a result of my work. And the people who we support should have that same opportunity. Okay, let's take a look at some various, and I'm so glad I get to show you a lot of photos of a lot of different employment opportunities and things. So the definition of an enclave, and again, if you're familiar with all these structures and words, that's great. I apologize for sharing them if you already know, but there's likely some number of people who are not familiar with these words, and we need to be familiar with them. For companies who require that the work be done in-house, and you can go ahead and read this. What we sometimes do, in-house being in their factory, in an office setting, such as or in a warehouse, or in a mailing room, as an example. Sometimes we create enclaves, which is a small group of people, 2, 3, 4, 5, who are working in that environment, that factory, that office, and have a job coach who is supporting them in their enclave. Now, remember, employment first does not support that. We made that very, we emphasize that in part 1, because it is not normative. And whenever you have a group of people with a disability, it tends to decrease their interaction from people outside the group, right? And so if I have 4 or 5 people with a disability in an enclave, it's likely that most of their interaction will be with each other, rather than with people outside the group. And remember, what we're striving for is to support that person in forming valued relationships with others. Now, I have no problem, though, with an enclave. It's not ideally what we want. We want fully integrated kind of opportunities for employment. But my mantra is take what you can get closest to what you want. And there are some folks, too, because of conduct issues, mental health issues, could be even medical issues, that we don't have the resources, or we can't figure out the strategies that we need to allow them to be more fully integrated. The resources being is, with an enclave, I can have one job coach with 3 or 4 people. On the other hand, if that person is not in an enclave, I may need one person just for one job coach for just one person. So it tends to be a resource issue. People with disabilities in work enclaves work alongside others doing the same work alongside, right? Limited work abilities and conduct needs may require that workers be situated in proximity to each other, as we just said, thus enhancing training or supervision. Oh, these are agency-sponsored businesses. What I'm doing here is I'm sharing with you a lot of approaches that we take to promote opportunities for employment. This is an agency that is started in Nebraska, called Integrated Life Choices. They're great. They're now in Colorado, and they are in Texas. And they just they're integrated. They've started from the very beginning. When they first started, 2 young guys started the business a number of years ago. And they absolutely embrace everything that we're talking about, that adults should be employed. And they started out right from the very beginning with no facility-based programs, but giving people opportunities to work. And one of the things that they have, and they have many different kinds of businesses they've set up, is a candy store. And I can't remember which of the cities this is located in, where the people who they support work and operate the candy store. And many of the things that are sold in the candy store, like candles and knickerbracks, are made by some of the folks who are being supported. One of the reasons they have this kind of structure is that the people who they support many times tend to be individuals that no other agency can support. Some very significant conduct issues. Most of these folks have come out of state-operated developmental centers. Here's examples, and all of these have releases, and I have permission, and yes, 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 for folks. And ideally, by the way, you want to be able to look at a picture, in terms of day support and employment. You never want to know who is providing the support versus who's receiving it. Which person is the job coach, right? And whenever we can have it that way, that's how you really want it. There should be no difference. Now, obviously, sometimes the person who receives support uses a wheelchair, right? And or has some other obvious phenotypical characteristic like Down syndrome, and you would likely believe there is someone receiving support. But that's one of the standards that I use. You don't want to be able to tell the difference between the two. They also have a farm called Emerald Farms, and the folks grow all kinds of stuff. This is an agency business, and then they go to all these markets during the week and even on weekends and sell all the stuff that they raise. And they do a lot of job carving, so that they'll take something like growing plants, and you can see this one individual at the top who has a lot of challenges and physically can't get in the fields and do things. So his job is to start the plants and putting seeds in the dirt and so on and so forth. And again, employment first would not accept this. They would not be accepting of this, right? And we'll look at things that they will be accepting of. This is an agency in North Dakota. I really love North Dakota. It's a great, great state, called Open Door. And they acquired a business which was a spice business. And the folks who they support have a wide variety of tasks dealing with these spices, and then they're sold online. They have kiosks in the community where they're sold, and they try to give these folks as much opportunity as possible to do things in the community with these spices as well. But it's a good business. Some of these folks get paid pretty well. These are some of these folks at Open Door, and I've worked with them for years. It's called Thunderbird Production is the name of the business. This is really interesting. This is a car washing business. The agency has contracts with used car lots, and people also bring their cars in and have their cars washed. I took this particular photo because the woman who is washing the car requires pervasive physical support, very limited range of motion, cannot stand up independently, and every reason that someone would give why she shouldn't be doing that is the reason why she should. She has limited range of motion, so by washing the car, we help her improve her extension. She has difficulty because of her cerebral palsy with a palmar grasp, and now we can put something in her hand and help her hold onto it to improve her grasp. Her hand positioning is coming like this with the thumb in that position, and you've seen that. Now when she's washing the car, we have an opportunity to help her open her hand. Do you remember what we're saying is employment opportunities should result in people gaining new skills? Well, for her, an important skill is our motor skills, helping her improve her ability to stand, eye-hand coordination, attention to task. Which, by the way, can you learn those things by putting pegs in a board? Yeah, you can improve your eye-hand coordination and pincer grasp, left to right progression, color matching. But it's meaningless, right? There's functional outcomes associated with it, but you wouldn't hire somebody to do that. So let's take the things that are really important in people's lives. And for her, improving her ability to stand and moving her arms and holding on to things improves the quality of her life. And how can we achieve those functional outcomes? In employment and volunteering. That's the point. It's not, sometimes people look at this and they're saying this, well, you're teaching her how to wash vehicles. No, I'm not teaching her how to wash a vehicle. I mean, if she learns to wash a vehicle, that's great. She may not truly even understand what she's doing, right? Any more than she might understand about putting pegs in a pegboard. But she gains from it. And what it says is, I value you. I care about you because I want you to become more independent in those skills. So I didn't give you an opportunity to identify the functional outcomes. I identified them for you. This is in Culver City, California, and it's called Michael's. Oh my goodness, this agency just is really terrific. They have these vehicles, they have a huge commercial kitchen, and folks are involved from the beginning to the end of the activity. So the people who they support are involved in all the cooking of scones and muffins and cookies. They're involved in cleaning the vehicles. And then they go out, I will show you, and sell all this stuff at various locations. It's a food truck, right? And they have the opportunity with the food truck people. And what do you know about food trucks? Food trucks go to a place. They tend to be the same place on the same day, and the same people go there, and people come in and, hey, Sylvia, how you doing, right? Many different job roles. Again, we can job carve with this. This person has a micro enterprise, which we'll talk a little bit more about, where people have their own business, but they're called micro enterprises, and makes quilts and sells those quilts and does pretty well doing that. Many times the businesses that organizations set up, provider agencies, are really sort of social enterprises. They'll do things such as collection of or separating scrap, separating copper, aluminum kinds of things, because that's like a social enterprise. It's an environmental kind of thing. Or doing things such as ringing the bell for the Salvation Army is a social enterprise. So let's just take a look at what the implications are here for social enterprises. They're businesses that tackle social problems, whether they're environmental problems or trying to do things like helping people who don't have a benefit of a permanent home. Those would all be, if you're volunteering or employed doing something there, that would be a social enterprise. People's life's choices or the environment. They make their money from selling goods and services in the open market, but they reinvest their profits back into the business or the local community. Do you remember in part one, we talked about Tierra del Sol in Sunland, California, who they had that large campus, which was originally a convent. And for many decades, they had people there receiving day supports in that cloistered, segregated environment. And now everyone is employed or volunteering in the community setting. And they took their campus and turned it into a conference center for social benefits. So organizations that are doing things in the area of housing for people who don't have benefit of a house, or environmental issues, wellness and health issues. So they've been very focused in trying to have conference opportunities there for folks that are for the benefit of the larger community. Oh, here's a really good one. This is a volunteer activity. Can't remember what state it's in, but it is a restaurant, truly a social enterprise, a restaurant that people can come to who have no money, and you order the food and you don't pay anything for it. And there's like a jar that if you only have 10 cents or 50 cents or something, you can put it in. If you don't have any money, that's fine. And these 4 women volunteer there. They come every day, like at 9 o'clock, and engage in helping to prepare the food that is going to be made available to the people who come there. It's important for us to recognize that we have people volunteer not to prepare them for employment. We really don't want to, that's not the point. The people who we support don't have to be prepared. Remember, there is no pre-vocational. Pre means never, according to Dr. Lou Brown, the father of supported employment. And we are doing this not to prepare them for employment. We're doing this because we're unable to obtain, for whatever reason, employment opportunities for them. If I didn't have their faces covered and you notice the red box over the faces of those 2 ladies, I think you'd have a hard time knowing who was the staff and who were the women being supported. And the facial expression, by the way, on the staff, it's the staff that's smiling. I didn't have to block out her face. She gave me permission. But the others, we didn't have it, so we blocked out their faces. But again, you can't tell really who's providing the support. She's working alongside those folks. And then contingent workforce or contingent employment is comprised of broad demographics representing all industry participants, including part-time, full-time, temporaries, and contractual or project workers employed in a variety of work arrangements. So this is where some organizations have like a workforce that others can call upon to do special things, whether it's set up chairs at a church on a special occasion, or I can't think. Help with holiday decorations at the courthouse because they don't have enough, people to put up and decorate the tree. So it's a contingent type of employment opportunity. Benefits for employees in working in temporary or contractual positions is flexibility of the work arrangement. So, if you have a conflict and you can't do it, that's fine. You're available when you're available. Adding skills and experience to their resume. Exploring work in a different industry or career. Bottom line, why not create and operate like a staffing agency? And some providers, in essence, are doing that, or ways of providing employment opportunities for folks. And then cottage industry has been around forever. What's cottage industry basically means working from home, right? And there's never been a time that we've had more people working in cottage industries than in the history of this country. Look how many people work from home now. The challenge of it, when we have folks who we support in a cottage industry, they don't really have the benefit of interacting with other people in community settings versus if they were fully integrated. However, it's employment, and there's some folks who are so medically fragile or so prone to health issues being out in the general public that the only safe place for them to be employed is in their home with a job coach if needed. There are some folks whose conduct is so severe and so intense that their employment might best be at home. And that's where the cottage industry concept comes from. They may involve many people working from their homes, typically though part-time. And you could also have people volunteering from their home. So if for some reason somebody's conduct is so severe, they have serious health issues, the old adage is, if Muhammad can't go to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad. So we could have them perhaps volunteer at home by bringing in toys from local preschool programs, because in California, toys and preschool programs have to be sanitized on an ongoing basis. And they could sanitize toys for a preschool program, perhaps cut out pieces of construction paper, making bookmarks and putting stamps on them for the holidays and giving them to the local library to hand out to patrons. I mean, maybe folding missiles and bulletins for a local church. So there are volunteer activities people can do in their home if we have few to no options, because it's very serious or pervasive conduct issues and or health issues. What we don't want, and we do see, is people just staying at home because of those issues. And by the way, that's what we saw during COVID. And there's still many people that are not back because the facility-based programs were closed. And people weren't doing anything of meaning. Not in all cases. Some facility-based day programs actually had people volunteering at home. They were bringing things into their home, and that's what we want, right? If they're not employed. Customized employment, right? And when you try to meet the needs of the employee with a disability, it's almost like an accommodation, and simultaneously meet the needs of the employer. And customized employment utilizes the strategy of job carving. Let's just use this as an example, customized employment. If you go to like a hair salon, the stylist has a wide variety of things they're supposed to do. Maybe they're supposed to do the laundry of all the robes and towels and everything that are dirty. That maybe they're expected to do the laundry. They're expected to sweep the floor. They're expected to fill all the various containers with the fluids that they use. So customized employment might be having somebody with a developmental disability come to that salon. They're not a licensed hairstylist, but maybe coming to the salon and doing part of that work, like laundering the linen, sweeping the floor, and so on and so forth. And it's customized. It is based on identifying the strengths, conditions, and interests of a job candidate or employee through a process of discovery. It identifies the business needs of the employer. It's a process-driven concept with 4 essential components, and it's discovery, job search planning, job development, and negotiations, because you usually have to negotiate with the employer of what part of this you're going to do. Commonly, for customized employment, the employer may have never thought about taking parts of that job and removing it and giving it to somebody with a disability. But what it does, it allows their employee, like the hairstylist, we use that as an example, to be able to do more of only what he or she can do, right? It may allow them to be more productive and earn more money for the business. And post-employment support. Okay, micro enterprises. This is a definition from Wikipedia. You know, I don't know where in the world that came from, and I've searched for other definitions. I mean, basically a micro enterprise is a small business, I don't know how else to say it, where an individual is encouraged to be entrepreneurial and start their own business. And it obviously provides a lot of flexibility because it's their business, so they don't need permission of an employer per se. Many business ideas are generated during person-centered planning sessions when employment is traditional or competitive wage employment is not seen as reasonable, either because of the lack of vacant positions available to be employed, or because of the degree of accommodation that person with disabilities will require when they're employed. Business ideas are commonly inspired by the talents and interests of the individuals. I'm going to show you some of these micro enterprises. The goal is to maximize the income in the most inclusionary setting. This young lady develops cards. She has a card business. Some of the cards she makes, others she purchases, and she has kiosks, those little stands that various businesses have allowed her to put in place, and she makes money by selling these cards. And these kiosks goes into these various businesses, check to see how many cards have been sold, and then replaces them and keeps the stock, up to expectation. This is a young lady in Los Angeles who is in basically a traditional day program, but they're trying to get people to do micro enterprises. And she started a massage business. And I'm just putting this up here. And they helped her develop her brochures and so on and so forth. Welcome to my micro business, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide a relaxation. I've sort of pulled this from the flyer because it's too hard to see. Massage to decrease the tension on those areas that makes you feel like you are carrying a big load of bricks. So that's another example. This is one of my favorites. Her name is Dusty Dutton. Interesting story behind this. I was doing a session at Golden Gate Regional Center, I think it was Golden Gate, and I was doing unemployment. And I make the statement, you've heard me say it, there are people I don't know how to get employed. I don't. I mean, not saying that someone else doesn't know. I don't know how to do it. So I made that statement. All of a sudden, the guy way in the back of the room jumps up and yells, "I know how to get everybody employed." Well, I'm blocking on his first name. I was hoping to think of it. I can't. But anyways, he was an accreditor for CARF. I think you all know about CARF, right? They're an accreditation agency historically for rehab centers, vocational services. He's my age, we're the same age. And he had been with them for years and I knew him. And so I said, it was good to see him. He says, he can get everybody employed, whether he can or not, I don't know, but that's what he said. So anyways, after the session, he comes up and next to him is a young woman, I don't know, 21, 22. And he says, I want to introduce you to my daughter, Dusty. Well, Dusty happens to have Down syndrome. I didn't know he had a daughter with Down syndrome. And he said, Dusty, can you tell Tom what you do? And Dusty says, well, Tom, when I was a little girl, I really liked puppets. I love puppets. And now I have a business putting on puppet shows. And she handed me her flyer. And what's really interesting about this, so that, how can I best say that? So that she comes across as really productive and people are not, you know how, like when my granddaughter was 4 years old, she would sing Annie. And we go, oh, Isabel, so good, so good. Isabel couldn't sing, but she was 4 years old, right? And so he wanted to make sure she was never in that position so that whatever she did, people would truly value it, the people there. So how they set this up is that, and this is her flyer, she puts on puppet shows for children 1 to 4 years of age who really value and appreciate the puppet shows she puts on. And all the voices and the music are pre-recorded. They have a professional stage that was made, and she operates the puppets, and people book her for these birthday parties and other events. Well, what happened is that all these little kids, mommy, 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 can we have this puppet? I want the puppet. Well, these were professionally made puppets manufactured by somebody. And so many of these children, one of these puppets, that her father struck a deal with the manufacturer. So she's now a manufacturer representative. When she does the puppet shows, she also sells puppets and really does quite well making money. So I just thought it was a perfect example. Now, many of these folks who have micro enterprises get to this point because they have families that have supported them. And I have pictures of others that we'll see here in a moment if we get that far. This is California too. ICANN, California Abilities Network. You may be familiar with ICANN. Artists create handmade products ranging from wirework jewelry, holiday wreaths, to potted succulent arrangements, so on and so forth. I was doing coaching. This was in Ohio on a Saturday. Some of you know that I go on site and actually train staff on site with the supervisors on my hip. Really training supervisors, but it was a residence. 3 ladies lived in the residence, and wherever people go, I go. And that morning they were going bowling. It was a Saturday morning. The 3 housemates go bowling, and 2 of these ladies are taking these like duffel bags with all this stuff. And I didn't say anything because I thought maybe it was bowling shoes or bowling balls. But anyways, we get to the bowling alley, and they make jewelry. And at the bowling alley, they had given them permission. They do this every Saturday to put their jewelry out, and people who come bowling will buy their jewelry, sometimes for their kids, and bracelets and necklaces and so forth. I thought, isn't that entrepreneurial? That's really great, jewelry for sale, right? And here is Michael's. Remember, we were talking about the food truck, and all of these things are baked by these individuals. And sometimes they sell it out of the truck. In this particular case, they're out of business here. And they serve coffee and so forth. It's really great, right? Because you get repeated interactions with the same people all the time. This is a gentleman who he doesn't speak much, but boy, can he play guitar. He has autism and very successful in doing entertainment for various groups. That's how he makes his living. His father was there and helped him establish his business and supports him in the process. And what's really interesting, over on the right-hand corner, let's see what comes up here. You see the gentleman with the camera in the lower right-hand corner? He is a photographer. He has Down syndrome, and his business is people hire him for weddings and everything else. And this guy is like pretty good. I mean, I'm at this conference. I believe, the keynote. And so people are mulling around. And he'll say, come on over here. I need the three of you over here. I'm going to take your picture. And he's taking pictures and does it for various associations and groups and weddings and all this kind of stuff. I thought that was a great micro enterprise. And there he is. Very proud of his work. And that's the end. That's it. So any questions? Any comments? Herman, are you there? Hello, Herman. I'm getting a call from California, so let me see if it's, hello? Yeah. Were people able, I thought somebody else was calling me, and I saw that you called me earlier, but I didn't know it was you. Your name didn't come up. Is that, were people able to hear or see me after break? Okay. Okay. Okay, well, let me do that right now. I'm on the screen. Is that, and everyone can probably hear me now. And I'm talking with Herman, and he would like for me to tell you that his Zoom has froze, and so he was not able to capture the questions that you may be asking on text. But hopefully everyone was able to hear me. This problem occurred over break, but hopefully the technical problems did not impair my ability to communicate to you, and I really hope everyone was able to hear me. So I'm sure Herman will check with a few of you just to make sure when we're done that everyone was able to pick up on this information. So, okay, so I'm going to sign off, Herman, then. Okay.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And okay, thank you, everyone, and be well, and feel free to give me a call or text me if you'd like any kind of follow-up, and it's all part of the deal. Happy to support you in any way. Bye.